right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to have you all here. We have a really large crowd today, so it seems like this is a topic. Oops.
Sí, tendrían derecho a verlo.
So as we get started, please double check that you're muted. And yeah, we'll dive into the topic today, which seems like it's something that a lot of people are interested in, which is really exciting because we have two experts here to talk about it. So I'm thrilled that you're all here. So right before I launch into the introduction, I wanted to ask everyone here, if you could, to put in the chat the number of employees that you have at your company, because this is going to help us get a sense for, you know, what your challenges are as an employer or a recruiter or someone who's handles hiring or someone who cares about retention at your company. And we want to get a sense for basically like how large of a challenge that is for you. While size doesn't necessarily translate to the problem, we just want to understand, you know, what your situation is so we can kind of tailor the content there. So thank you for doing that. I see numbers coming in. So briefly, I'm going to just go over what you are going to learn today from our amazing panelists and guests. So what you're going to learn is why retention matters to the debt collection industry specifically, but also just in general. You're going to learn where and how to start your search for candidates, which I know is a huge challenge. You're going to learn interview best practices. So how to kind of make sure that your interviews are being maximized to their effectiveness. And then you're going to learn onboarding best practices. Those are going to be kind of in those first 30 to 90 days of your new employees, getting them onboarded in a way that translates to your success as a company. And then we're going to wrap it up with a way for you to calculate your own retention rate so that you can kind of get a sense for where you're at right now and how you can improve. And once again, just double check that you're muted so that we can all have as few distractions as possible during this so that you can get the most out of it. So briefly, I'm just going to introduce the amazing guests that we have here today on this webinar. So first, I want to introduce Candace Burroughs. She is the manager of human resources and administration at Arbeit. And as the admin and HR manager at Arbeit, Candace leads and manages the day-to-day HR and admin activities. She provides oversight and guidance to the development and monitoring of processes related to recruitment and retention, compliance, compensation, benefits training, development, billing, as well as overseeing admin functions. So she really does it all. And she has tons of experience on hiring and training and looking for candidates. So she's going to have a ton of valuable insight for you all today. And then, of course, I'm thrilled to introduce Mary Shores, who we have collaborated with many times in the past. And we're so grateful for all the investment that she makes in our content because she is an expert on this topic. And yeah, we're so happy to have her here. So Mary Shores is a second-generation collection agency owner, a best-selling author, and an international speaker. Her current passion in life is promoting collector training and development through the Collection Advantage online training program, which features Mary's extensive studies into neuroscience and compassion to teach collectors how to execute high-converting empathetic scripting. So I'm so excited to have both of these experts here to speak on this topic. It's going to be amazing, and I think you're all going to learn a lot. So right before I pass it over to Candace, I want to run a couple polls to get a better idea of where everyone's at with their current retention process. So if you could go ahead and answer this question. It's anonymous, so no one will see your response, but we are curious, what is the average length of time that you see an employee staying with your company? So right now, we have a few people saying less than 6 months. 13% of you are saying less than 6 months. And then we have the majority of you saying you have employees staying with you 1 to 2 years. That's amazing. We have a few people saying longer than 3 years. That's incredible. Congratulations. But it looks like we're averaging out to the majority of you saying 1 to 2 years is the sweet spot, which is great. 42% of you. 26% of you said 6 to 12 months is the average length of time. And then 11% of you said less than 6 months. So that's awesome. And I have one more question for you. How long does it take to get your collectors up to speed on your preferred procedures or up to pace with your veteran employees? And if you could, those answers are anonymous as well. I'm curious what your onboarding process is currently like, how long it usually takes. 50% of you are saying 6 to 12 months. 38% of you are saying 3 to 6 months. The majority of you are saying 30 to 90 days, which is awesome. That's great. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And with that in mind, I'm going to now turn it over to Candace, who's going to start us off talking about why retention matters in general and also to the debt collection industry. So Candace, it's all you.
Great. Hey, everyone. Thanks, Emily. As Emily mentioned, I am the admin and HR manager at Arbeit. And today we are going to go through all the steps on how to have success with onboarding. First, we'll start with retention. Why does retention matter? This is something that we need to be proactive about from the very beginning. According to data found from over 234,000 exit interviews, 77% of turnover could have been prevented. So this is something we want to make sure that we are doing all that we can to prevent turnover from day one. Start the retention process when the person is still open to staying, not after they've already decided to leave. So we all know that there are a lot of reasons why retention is important, but we are going to answer this question, why does retention matter, with a different question, what does turnover cost? So there are a few costs associated with turnover, of course. First, there is a dollar cost. Anytime a team member leaves a vacant role, there is time, money, and effort associated with recruiting, hiring, and training a replacement. We want our team members to stay with us long term, and if they don't, then we have to repeat this whole cycle all over again. There can also be separation costs like severance pay, costs associated with unemployment claims, the expense of continued benefits, and so on. Another cost is morale. This is a cost that most companies don't even notice. Turnover can impact the morale and productivity of the team that's left, which can also lead to lost revenue, less efficiency, and more turnover. Another cost is the knowledge, skill, and relationships that you lose with that departing employee. Consider the amount of time, effort, and resources that were directly invested in building that employee's abilities and knowledge that you may now have to start over again with a new employee. And there's also a brand cost. Current and former employees can be valuable ambassadors for your company, or they can share their negative experiences with all of our online networks, including both personal and professional accounts, putting both the employer brand and the consumer brand at risk. Also, if you have an employee leave who is client-facing, that can have a huge impact on your brand as well. Retention starts with onboarding, and onboarding starts with hiring. So a huge part of finding the candidates is where to look. There are a lot of free sources to find candidates. For example, you could start with simple social media and just the simplicity of word of mouth. Facebook groups are also super beneficial. You want to make sure that you're joining as many Facebook groups related to your industry as you can. And in there, you will find a lot of candidates who are actively looking for positions. And you can also share your application link directly for candidates to apply. LinkedIn, of course, is another popular platform. There are a ton of professionals on here who are actively looking for jobs. And there's also groups like 1000 Hires that work directly with candidates to help find them a position. Industry message boards like Slack, for example, you can post your openings in any public channel to gain attention and draw on candidates. And finally, employee referrals. These are definitely the most time and cost effective. And if you trust your current employee, you will have no problem trusting who they recommend. With these, you can also consider offering an incentive. For example, every qualified candidate who is hired, the employee who referred them can receive some sort of a bonus as a thank you. From the very beginning of the whole process, you want to make sure that you're getting a sense of soft skills that the candidate portrays. From the moment you start reviewing the resumes and applications, and even during the phone screenings and interview process, you want to make sure you are keeping an eye out for the specific skills you're looking for. Some soft skills that Amy Perkins from Inside ARM suggests are candidates who are always thinking win-win, candidates who are always one step ahead, and the ones who are always eager to learn. The onboarding process starts in the interview. So all of this information is in preparation for the hiring and onboarding process. These tools will really help set up your collectors and your agency to succeed. Now I'm going to pass it over to Mary, who will discuss interview best practices and onboarding.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to talk about some things you can do to get a little bit more insight onto your candidates and perhaps, whether or not they're a good fit for your company and whether they're a good fit for the job. So, okay, next slide. So one of the things, whenever I'm talking to my office manager, and there was a time in my company when we were small enough and I would be much more involved with the interview process than I currently am. So I kind of had to take a lot of my communication skills and a lot of the things that I've learned and really groom her to take over to find the best candidates. So one of the first things is talking about how do you review someone's resume? And of course, this is for any position at your agency. So whether someone is an entry-level position, whether they're a collector, or whether this is going to be a middle management or a team lead position, you really want to make sure that you're looking at their resume. And then what I want to add to that is take a highlighter and then read their resume. And I would like you to highlight 3 things of interest on their resume. And the reason I want you to do this, it's just, if I could give an example, maybe it's a previous job they had, maybe it's a specific skill set listed in one of their previous jobs. Maybe it's something about their schooling, but something that you find is a little bit of a match to either your company values or to the job role. And I want you to highlight at least 3 things. Now, what you'll do with this is during the interview, when you've got their resume sitting right there in front of you, whether you're on Zoom or whether you're just talking to them face to face, you'll have the resume right in front of you. And as you're going through your interview, what I want you to do is weave in conversation about the things that you've highlighted. Now, this sounds really simple, but I want to tell you it's a game changer because it's a really great way to get them talking more specifically about the items on their resume and their skill sets. You can even ask them to tell you a story, like, tell me a time when you needed to use this skill set to accomplish, X, Y, Z. Whenever we're interviewing anyone at my agency, we always keep 3 important questions in mind, okay? And the first question is, can this person do the job? What does this mean? It means their skills, their qualifications, are they actually qualified for the job? And right now, I don't know about you, but we have been finding the candidate pool to be somewhat shrinking. So I'm not sure, Candace, can you give me a head nod if you found the same? Yeah, so I think a lot of people have told me this, and you can certainly let me know in the chat if this has been your experience. So if you are feeling like there's not a lot of candidates right now, then what can happen is you can be at risk for settling for people who really can't do the job. So we actually had this happen to us recently. We hired someone, I thought that she might be a good fit, but we've been really stretching and trying to fit people in because we're not getting our ideal candidates. So we revisited that and we have been able to correct it. But that person ended up leaving at 90 days because they were not the right person for the job. So this is a very important question to make sure that you can check the boxes on all of those skill sets and qualifications required for the job. Now, the next question that is very important is, can they do the job long term. Okay. What does long term mean? Well, that's up to you. I like the longer term, the better. The average employee who's worked at my agency has been there for over 7 years. And we have some people who've been there 20 years, and we have many people who've been there more than 15 years. So, really, I want to know is, can they commit to the job long term? And I will actually have a conversation with them about that, because if I can't get at least a 2-year commitment up front verbally, then that is going to change whether or not I offer them the position. Because at my agency, we do a ton of mentoring, and anyone who's near me, they get an education like no other, because we invest in every single member of our staff. And that third and final question that I really want to put out there is, will they fit within your company culture? Now, tell me in the chat if this has ever happened to you, but have you ever hired someone and then next thing you know, like 6 months later, or maybe you've got a certain department and there just seems to be a lot of drama within the walls of that department, or, if you're a smaller agency, all of a sudden you just start noticing bickering happening. And then, you try to figure it out for a while, and then you investigate, and you find the common denominator is one particular person. And then inevitably something will happen. Maybe you let that person go, or maybe they leave on their own accord. But as soon as that person leaves, it's almost like the pressure valve went off and everyone just went back to normal. And what is the point of that? Is to let you know that it only takes like one bad apple. So, you understand what your company culture is, and you really want to find somebody who's going to fit within that. So if, like Arbeit's got a very vibrant culture, they really share, they're really outgoing on social media. And so maybe they want to find people who fit within that. Like our company, we are hustlers. Like I'll just tell you, one time someone came to work at our agency, and her previous job had been at a job where there was a lot of water cooler talk. Do you know what I mean by that? I mean, she was a person that liked to hang out at the water cooler and talk about the cookies she baked the night before. And that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but it was not our speed. Like, our speed is my people like to be busy from the first minute of the day until till the end of the day. They like to be very productive. So if you've got somebody who's kind of like, a little more nonchalant or a little more laid back with their work styles, other people will start to resent it really, really quickly. So yeah, if you've ever encountered that, please let me know. And okay, to change the slide now, Emily. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is something that was really a game changer for me in interviewing. It's actually called Motivational Interviewing. And there is a book written about it. I honestly don't remember who even wrote the book. Probably have it sitting here somewhere. But what you want to do is, if you're really feeling you're feeling like you're vibing with this person and you're thinking that you want to hire them, so you're kind of getting towards the end of the interview and things are wrapping up, I want you to ask one more question, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in this job? Okay, now this question is a game changer, because they're going to tell you a number. Now, I don't know about you, but I always find that people will tell you they want the job even when they don't. I don't know what that weird thing is. We can ask Candace later, but there's like this psychology about, even if they don't think the job is right for them, maybe it's like a fear of rejection, they still want you to offer them the job. So if you've ever like offered someone a job and then they either don't show up on the first day, or they offer it and they're going to start in 2 weeks, and then the day before you're expecting them on their first day, they just email you and say, oh, I'm sorry, I actually found this other job, so I'm not going to take your position, I'm so sorry. And they just move on from that like it's no big deal. But that has a cost to us, as Candace was mentioning earlier. So if you ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in the job? Now, they'll probably say something that's above a 7. I've never had anyone say any number less than 7. The next step, so step 2 of this, is you ask them, why so high? Okay, this is the magical part. So let's just say they say an 8. Then you're going to say, why so high? And then they're going to tell you, well, you know, I'm in college and I like the idea of this position because it has flexible hours. So what's the clue there? Flexible hours. Maybe they say, I'm young and I don't have a family yet, but I really like the idea of being in collections so that I can learn about my finances. Or, you know, maybe they'll tell you that they really like the bonus structure or the commission structure. Maybe they're, you know, I've had a lot of people say, you know, it's my first job, it's entry level. I'm very excited about working in an office environment because in the past I worked retail. Now, what I want you to do is mentally, or if you're actually taking notes, because it's a great idea. So John Russo says some candidates are waiting until government benefits end. That's very true, right? We all know that that's true. So if you ask them why so high, here's what's important. It's like a sales technique. They've just told you everything you need to know to sell them on the job. And also you're getting an idea of whether they'll really commit. Now, if you're somebody at a larger company, I just saw Kelly Fione. She has it looks like she answered that question with 500. And by the way, I was just on a webinar with her yesterday, and she is such an amazing trainer. And so I'm so excited to encounter you 2 days in a row, Kelly. So when you're asking them like, why so high? And they're giving you all these reasons. Well, if you're interviewing people, say like 5-6 times a day, you can start to like get some data, right? Like, why are people attracted to this job? And then you can take that data and then write it into the job description even more so that you attract people who are looking for what you're going to offer. And then sometimes, I don't do this every single time, but sometimes if I really, really want somebody and they say a 7, you know, and I'm like, man, I really want this person to take the job, I would say to them, what would make it a 10? And then now they're going to tell you every reason why they don't want the job. So in the first question, they're telling you every reason why they do want the job. And in the second question, they're telling you the reasons they don't want the job. Now, of course, your job is just to listen, because this is what this is doing for you. It's letting you pull back the curtain, because, you know, people these days, especially young people, they get interview training. You know, when I was young, I never got to be coached on how to be good on an interview. And so we need to also be coached on how do we peel back the curtain so we can see what's really going on with, you know, the wizard on the other side of the curtain, because wouldn't that help you prevent making a bad hire? Okay, we can change the slide now, Emily. All right. Well, I really love the idea of talking about onboarding, especially in the collection industry, because the truth is that when I was in high school, never, ever did I utter the words, I can't wait to grow up and work at the collection agency. You know, I heard fireman, police officer, teacher, nurse, doctor. I mean, I personally wanted to be an archaeologist. So I just don't know anyone who really planned on becoming a debt collector. And even though I'm second generation, that didn't mean that was my dream, was to go into the collection industry. And so when you can create an onboarding process that is geared towards making it something successful, then you're going to increase the chances of retention. So this next section, I want to tell you some things that I have personally done for the past 22 years that has made me successful with this onboarding situation. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So the first one is I have created what I call business boot camp. So business boot camp is what every person goes through the moment they get hired. So from day one, they go through the business boot camp. Now, what business boot camp means, and it kind of depends like where they're going to fall in the company, because it's going to look slightly different for collectors than it's going to look for operational staff, than it's going to look for executive staff. So in business boot camp, I've really created a consistent agenda. We literally have a multiple week agenda that says day by day by day what the topic is on that day. And we even sometimes have it broke down hour by hour, especially in the first 2 weeks when they're having to learn industry standards, and they're having to learn FTCA, and they're having to learn all of like the phone equipment and, you know, how data entry works. So one of the things that we've done, especially when we're looking for operational staff, that is very fun is that when they're going through the boot camp, we actually give them a taste of all the jobs. And this has worked out really well because what that helps us do is identify where they're going to be successful. Okay, so maybe I have them learn the basics of doing mail returns, learn the basics of doing skip tracing, learn the basics of some of the things that the legal department does. I'll have them do some data entry, you know, and they just like go full circle and they do all the different entry level tasks of all, you know, all the different departments. We find, you know, maybe we find somebody that their communication skills are through the roof and we want to put them in our dispute department. And that was uncovered because of going through this business boot camp. One of the things that really surprises me is how many people that I have found have hidden technology skill sets. So we would put them on things like doing the electronic uploads, and, you know, we would find that some people really had more of an aptitude than other people. So the key there is that you don't want your training agenda to be something that is not documented. In this industry, documentation is everything, right? So the more you have your work instructions documented, the better off the situation's going to go, especially if you're small. You know, some of the bigger agencies, they have the luxury of having full-time trainers. And when you're a small agency like me, I mean, we're under 30 people, we don't have the luxury always to have full-time training agendas or full-time training team members. So we have to really, you know, divide and conquer, and having this consistent training agenda already set, it's what saves us because we don't have to scramble to get it all together. We always have all of our work instructions tested and effective like before we start with them. So we went through the PPMS process years ago. I believe ACA calls it Blueprint now. That has been something I've lived by for a long time. So whether you're doing the Blueprint thing or PPMS or whether you're not, I am telling you that if you write down step by step instructions of all the tasks and how to handle the tasks, and you really make sure that your trainees understand the task inside, outside, backwards, and forwards. In other words, it's like it's in their DNA, and you actually document that they did that, and you don't have them move on to another skill until they have mastered the first one. You know, I'll tell you a story. When I remember years ago, I was having a meeting, you know, for a local somebody I wanted to have for collections. And it was very evident. It was like a small town water company. And they had a lady who had been in a certain job for like her whole career, like 25 years. We'll just call her Susie. So Susie was like your basic office manager type. She understood everything about that business, right? Call her at 3 a.m. to ask her a question. She's going to, without even thinking, be able to answer the question. So then, but Susie had to retire. So when Susie retired, they hired Paula. Paula took the job and there were no documented anything. There was nothing left for her and she had to like figure it out. And even though Susie left everything in good order, Paula wasn't able to figure out how she got there. Like, how did she get it in such good order? So Paula starts feeling very uncomfortable inside. And next thing you know, she's not really doing her job and she feels anxiety about that. So she starts hiding the fact that she needs help. Why? Because nobody wants to feel stupid when they're first starting a job, right? No one wants to feel that. People can feel hesitant to share that they're struggling. So Paula ends up getting fired because she wasn't doing the job right. Then they, you know, and what I'm saying is it's just going to go on like that and on like that and on like that, all because Susie never documented anything. So make sure that you take the time to like document your processes so that when it comes time to hire new people, it's going to be consistent. You know, all it takes is one person being trained incorrectly that could cause, you know, a big downward spiral. And then of course, I'm a big believer in making sure that you're documenting all of the training that is happening in the new hires file. So I know like in our Collection Advantage training program, it's all online. So all of the documentation is online. So when a collection agent, you know, fills out that they did this one particular exercise, they can save it and you can put it right in their file. So that really works out well, especially if you ever have to defend or your clients are starting to ask you for some of your training practices, you'll have it already documented. Okay, Emily, next slide. Yes. So one of the things we always do is we like to modify our onboarding practices based on feedback that we get from people. So as they're going through the business boot camp, we always ask them how it's going and we invite them to give us feedback. And we find like the best suggestions from people who are brand new at the job, because we're just asking them like, what kinds of things can we do to make it easier on them? Another great place to do this is during the exit interview. So one of the things we found, like for years, we would get these glowing results on our exit interviews. And then all of a sudden, more recently, and especially during COVID, people have been starting to change up their feedback. And so we had to take a look at that feedback, and then we had to go revisit our business boot camp to see where we needed to make adjustments, because people's, sort of emotional outlook is a little different right now. Okay, next slide. So here's one of my favorite things to talk about. One of the reasons why the job pool is what it is, and I don't know about you, but even before COVID, it seemed like it was getting more and more challenging over the years to find especially young people to do the work. And I feel like if you're in business today and you're as old as I am, then you're old enough to remember like the baby boomer generation and how it was all about pride and responsibility and hard work. Whereas we're now living in the millennial era, and people make decisions based on how they feel. Like I'm talking about that all the time when I'm training collectors. And how that works out when you're trying to hire people is to understand that young people do not want to necessarily work just for the sake of working, which someone, mentioned in the chat earlier about, being on a government program. Well, they're looking for what's best for their life. So if they can take a break from working and go to school and explore other things, they're very likely to do that. One of the biggest things that I believe they're looking for is companies that are humanitarian plus. My sons are 19 and 20 right now, and they really only want to work for a brand that is humanitarian plus versus working for a company that is humanitarian minus. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, what impact are you making on the world? Are you a company that is actively seeking how to move human evolution forward? Or is your country or company and your industry actively making life difficult for people, meaning that it's humanitarian minus? So next slide, please. This brings me to talking about the impact brand model, because obviously, the collection industry is an industry that has been stigmatized for as long as I can remember. I mean, I even remember when I was a kid and my parents had the agency, like they didn't want me to tell anyone what our business was. And I didn't understand that at the time. I was really proud that my family owned a business. So when we're looking at how can you establish yourself as a humanitarian plus company, this is going to be very important moving forward. So the first part of this is just like ensuring that you have a great product or service. Now, I realize likely on this webinar today, everyone's in the collection industry, I'm assuming, but whatever your product or service is, really get really clear on what that product is, what that service is, and who you are servicing. So for example, we've all heard like you can have something that is really great, outstanding quality, but don't expect to get that for super cheap. So like define where you are at in your space, and make sure people know how great your product or services are, and make sure that your employees know so that they can also spread the word, which comes to like your company culture. So there are 6 elements of an impact brand. So it's great company, great product or service, a great company culture. Are you investing in training? Are you investing in mentorship? Are you making sure that their safety is, at the top of your priority list? We want to focus on, as an impact brand, we want to focus on what is that client experience and that consumer journey, because in the new normal, our clients are going to be looking for a different level of service and different expectations. And the next one is really being very clear on your return on investment. So how does your strategy you know, how does your strategy, your company culture, your investment in client experience, and your products going to create an investment for whoever it is that you're trying to put out into the marketplace, but also who you're hiring. Now, the next one is make sure, as we are up leveling in technology, and seems like every single way, I believe that it's going to be more important than ever to learn how to embed the emotional intelligence into all the technology that your company is using. And then finally, all of this kind of helps you figure out what is the impact that you want your agency to make in the world. So for ours, we want people to feel good about paying their debt, because instead of feeling shame and unworthiness for having a debt, and because of that, that's the products we create. That's the culture that we have. We want to focus on our consumer journey, and our clients are a match to what we provide, because this is the impact that we want to make, is we want to make people feel good about paying their debt. Okay, so next slide, Emily. All right, so thank you so much. I really enjoy talking about the interview process and creating an impact brand, because I think that it's going to be really trending. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to the lovely Candace, and she's going to teach us some really important takeaway right here.
Thanks, Mary. I did want to touch base on the motivational learning. I just wanted to say I really love that approach, because like you said, there are so many candidates who are so agreeing in interviews just because they think that that's what you want to hear. They want to agree with what you're saying, with what you're asking. So this kind of gives us the opportunity to find out, are they being truthful, and to make them not so agreeable. I love that approach.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, so in closing, I'd like to talk about measuring your retention rate. This is something that is super important to always be aware of. And you could do this annually and revisit it and see, have you been improving? Have you been declining? And kind of reevaluate from there. But this formula here will allow you to figure out what your retention rate actually is. So for example, if you wanted to measure the retention rate for 2020, you would take the number of employees that started at the beginning of the year and divide that by the number of employees who are left at the end of the year, but who stayed at the company the entire time. Currently, employee retention rates in the US average around 90% and vary by industry. So generally speaking, an employee retention rate of 90% or higher is considered very good. And that is everything that we have for you today. So now I can actually turn it right back over to Emily, who can take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Candace and Mary. That was awesome. Yeah, we learned a lot about how to be more intentional throughout the entire hiring, onboarding, interviewing process. So hopefully everyone learned a lot. But we did have a few questions come in. So I'm going to start with a question, and then if you have any questions, now is the time. Please put them in the chat and we will address them now. So the first question that came in is, what is something specific that companies can do to improve and increase their retention rates?
So I can start with this one. I think communication is key. You want to make sure that you're always getting feedback from your employees. So that's as simple as conducting surveys regularly after their onboarding, after their training. Receive that feedback from them and work off of that. So that is how I would approach it.
Yeah, I would agree. I also think that when you're paying more attention to your onboarding process, and you're really making sure that they understand their skills and what's expected of them. I used to do this thing where I talked about expectations, boundaries, and level of authority. And it was just kind of a way of like making sure everyone understood the expectations. So sometimes like employees can get a little tripped up if they're not feeling like they're doing a good job, and they don't feel like they have anyone to talk to about it, then they might start sort of looking for another job. And especially in this industry, sometimes people take a job in this industry with the intention that they're going to keep looking for a job. And so if you think about that, like try some perspective taking and think, okay, when this person starts on day one, don't take them for granted. Instead, think about how do we keep them here? How are we communicating? I always say the best thing is to invest in their training. You want to invest in communication. You want to invest in emotional intelligence. You want to invest in critical thinking skills. That's a big one, because especially with the younger workforce, they're not always taught that. So the more you can invest in their training, the more they feel invested in and will stick around.
Awesome. Yeah, I know for sure. I mean, as an employee, it's very clear that my growth is a priority to my employer. So that obviously is a huge factor of my own engagement. So I can speak to that for sure. So another question that just came in, what would be a good way to weed out those who only want the job just to leave after getting access to everything, compared to those who want the job and want to keep it?
So I think this is something that you could try to get a feel for during the interview process. It's kind of the difficult questions you need to ask. You want to ask long-term what they're looking for, what are their goals, where do they see themselves in 5 years? You could ask about personal, where they see themselves. You could ask professional. You could ask what their interests are, to kind of see if this is something that's going to align with them long-term. Yeah.
And the question, Tamika, the question looks a little intentional. Like, are you saying that people are specifically coming to work at your company because you guys have some kind of secret sauce and they want to know what the secret is? Could you give some clarification? I think in general, a great way to weed people out is to have a real nice step-by-step process during the actual interview. So one of the things we do, and this is a great test, is we have people take the FTCA test before we offer them the job. Now, the FTCA test, I think this takes them on average like between an hour and 2 hours to take it. So anyone who's going to put up the time and effort to show up for that test and actually take it, I feel like that's there's some psychology behind getting people to make little commitments and how that kind of bonds them to the situation. And so if they don't show up for the FTCA test, yay, we've just weeded them out.
Love that. Okay, another question that came in. We are looking to hire younger people to help give them an opportunity they may not otherwise have. So where should they go, or where do they typically go to look for openings? For example, LinkedIn, maybe college boards, if you have any insight on that.
I think all the above. Of course, I think social media is definitely popular. I also think that LinkedIn is a very well-known and popular tool that a lot of seeking candidates will go to because that's what they know. So I think it's going to be a lot of the almost obvious platforms for recruiting, just because that's what they know at that time.
I definitely love the idea of the college boards if you're looking for young people. And also if you're looking for young people, I know my assistant and I, we're working on a blog. I think it's going to be called 5 Reasons to Work at the Collection Agency. But if I'm talking to a young person about a job after Candace has found them on the ZipRecruiter and the Facebook and all of that stuff, I'm older than that. So, I'd probably say the newspaper. No, I know that's not the right question. I know that's not the right answer. I'm making fun. But my point is once you get that young person in communication with you, start really telling them. I tell my candidates, look, you want this job because nowhere else are you going to get the kind of financial education that you're going to get within the walls of a collection agency. You're going to get great communication skills. You're going to get great negotiation skills. We literally tell them everything they're going to get. Kind of not what's in it for me, but what's in it for them. And what they really are looking for is mentorship. One of the things that I want to do, I haven't done yet, but I want to set up a mentorship program at my office that's like a 1-to-1, which means I just take one veteran employee, and anytime a new person gets hired, I just match them up and say, your job isn't really to train them, but take them through the ropes. you know, like show them around, ask them to lunch, tell them the behind the scenes stuff, which is not gossip, because the last thing you want, have you ever had this happen? You get a new employee starts, and then like, Jan from over in accounting comes over and was like, oh, well, don't worry about how John acts. John's just that way, because that will plant seeds. That will plant seeds in their mind that will make them start to want to go almost from the get-go. Do you agree with that one, Candace?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Teresa, who asked that question, just said, yes, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point.
Oh, good. I'm so
Um,
glad.
And I want to circle back to Tamika's point. She did say she goes through and asks all types of questions, and she doesn't offer hourly pay. So she has candidates that come and get hired who come out to be great new hires, but then weeks later disappear or say they quit.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead,
sorry.
Candace.
No, sorry. I was going to say, I wanted to circle back to that too. The application, like I think Mary said, look at the quality and the responses. The current platform we use, it actually tells us how long they spend on each question. An applicant the other day spent 3 minutes and 40 seconds on almost the entire application. So obviously that right there is a red flag. If they're not taking the application seriously, then they wouldn't take the position seriously. I think that's something that you need to look for in the way that they answer the questions and how much time they actually and effort they actually put in that application from the beginning.
That's fascinating, Candace. I'm thinking, wow, that just blew my mind, honestly. What I was going to suggest too is really utilize that motivational interviewing, because that will give you so much more information, and really that question about what's missing or what's keeping it from a 10, because you'll start to notice some patterns. Now, one way you can practice this motivational interviewing is like, if you have kids, go home or whenever you're around your kids today, ask them some silly question like, oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you want spaghetti for dinner tonight? And just practice this. I've been doing this with my son for years, and he loves it because he's actually so good at it now that he knows exactly what I'm doing, but it helps us sometimes even helps us figure out decisions. So thanks so much for the question and the follow-up.
So circling back to what you mentioned, Mary, about having your potential applicants take the FTCPA test. We had a question come in about that. So we are having a hard time getting people to even fill out an Indeed assessment before hiring, and those take 10 to 20 minutes. How do you find people who are willing to take the FTCPA test? Our pay rate's much higher than average.
Yeah, Rachel, and our pay rate, I don't know where it's at, but it's probably just average. So that's a great question. Thank you so much. I would take a look at your ad. So, Candace is probably more qualified than I am. I can just tell you, like, if your ad is great and it's something that is makes the job irresistible or makes them actually want the job, there has to be some kind of point of interest for them to have the job. But on the other hand, I want you to say good. Like, if they are not willing to take a 20-minute assessment, then good. Like, they just saved you. And so, Candace, would you address like maybe some points to think about when you're actually writing the ad itself?
Yeah, I think the most popular is benefits. You need to advertise your benefits as much as possible. That's what people are looking for. That's what they honestly care about. Of course, the position comes first, but in the end, they care about the compensation and the benefits. So as much information that you could provide on that is what will actually draw on those candidates to want to complete the applications that might be a little bit lengthier.
Great. Okay, we had a question come in. Can you address the number of resumes you need to secure X amount of phone screens, which then turn into second interviews, and then like X amount of new hires? So maybe like what's the percentages that you see in the flow of applications, like how many applications per interviews, how many interviews per hire?
Sorry, I was just rereading. So actually, I don't know if I'm understanding. Can you elaborate?
Oh, she's asking for a formula. So, so what she's asking is, if I get 100 resumes, how many of those will turn into whatever is the next step? How many will turn into the next step? So she's asking for some numbers, or actually it's John, sorry. He's asking for some numbers to inform like a formula.
That's a great question. I mean, how we handle it basically, a lot of the applications that come in, it can be overwhelming, of course. You want to make sure that you have the support and enough help on your team who could actually go through all of these interviews to see what candidates are actually qualified enough to go to the phone screening process. There's a lot of time invested in all this process. So you want to make sure that you are dedicating the time that you have allowed for the candidates who you think will be long-term. You want to make sure that you're weaning out as many candidates that won't be long-term as possible. Maybe a lot of candidates, even if there's a couple red flags. Actually, I think Mary mentioned this earlier. When you go through the resumes, you want to highlight those 3 items that stick out to you. That is much more time consuming, and then you can compare at the end. Maybe this candidate only has 1, maybe they have 2, and then you could base it off of that, which might help give you a better understanding of how many applicants you should move on to that next process.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so kind of on that same note that we were talking about earlier, when is it appropriate to discuss / mention salary during the recruiting process? And would you recommend including that information in the job description?
There's pros and cons, of course, of doing that. If you include salary in a job description, I think you wean out the candidates who wouldn't be a good fit for right away. So that is a huge positive. You don't want to waste your time, or you don't want to waste the candidate's time and money and effort. But on the other hand, you can have internal issues. If your internal team sees so-and-so is getting offered this much, where do I fall? That can cause internal issues that might not work out in the end. So you have to decide which one works out better for yourself. You want to make sure that you won't be offending any other current team member who you already have on board and you don't want to lose. So you need to figure out what would make sense for your company as a whole.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we had a question come in on the topic of retention. When you start to see an employee kind of starting to disengage, maybe what are some of those warning signs? And then how do you stop that before it happens? Because I know we spoke earlier about being proactive. How can you, when you kind of start to see it happening, stop it before it happens?
So some of the warning signs I would say are definitely less engagement, less attendance. They might be calling in, showing up late, declining performance as well, of course. Those are all red flags. And I think that in order to address them, first, I think it's very important to do it in private. You don't want to make this company known to everyone. You want to make sure that you respect this employee to discuss it in private with them. You could always review their current job description and their duties, and you can go over your current company policies and see if they're still aligned and see if there's any confusion in there. You want to make sure that you communicate what you're noticing, and hopefully they'll give you the feedback that you're looking for in regards to why they might be having declining performance. And you want to make sure that you allow them to explain themselves too. You want to make sure that you're hearing what they have to say and let them know that you're taking them seriously and that these are concerns that you wanted to address and resolve.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Another question that came in. Is it ever okay to hire a candidate that does not meet the experience requirements necessarily, but you feel still has high potential? How do you identify that potential?
I think it kind of varies. So it depends on the type of position you're hiring for. If it's an entry level and you're okay with having no experience, some people like to have the ability to train them with a fresh start. There are certain ways that people learn from previous roles that are hard to get out of. So if you could train them from the very beginning on what your company practices, it could work out that way.
For sure. Okay. We only have time for maybe a few more questions, but another one that came in. What is the best approach to respond to a candidate that you'd like to set up a phone screen? Call, text, or email. What have you found works best?
I found email works the best for Arbeit specifically. The platforms that we recruit on, everything is through email. So they are getting notifications through email as soon as we view the application, as soon as we respond to the application. If we'd like to schedule something, everything from us is email, and then we go through phone, but email I found has worked the best in my opinion.
I agree about the email, and we have a policy too of how fast we're going to respond. So we want to respond within a certain number of hours, and we also want to have that first touch point or interview, whether it's a phone screen or a Zoom interview. We want to have that happen relatively quickly. So we have like a really timed approach, but it's a combination of email, and then we always want to respond to them as quickly as possible. But I wouldn't do the text messaging because I feel like it's going to blur some lines. And we did have somebody we tried to text once, and it just created a bunch of confusion, you know. So I would leave text messaging for last.
Awesome. Okay. Last question before we wrap up. If you are concerned about retention as a company, what is a good way to handle discipline? I think that's a great question. I wanted to make sure we got to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
I mean, one of the things that I train on all the time is setting up an atmosphere of sharing the wins. You know, we get so caught up in everyone's doing their job, but then when they do it wrong, we need to have, you know, an approach for that. So some of the things we do is we really encourage a share the win atmosphere. We do a lot of incentives, we do a lot of fun things. And then when we are needing to discipline someone, we'll have a certain amount of coaching that happens first to give them a chance to relearn what they need to learn. But there's just a different atmosphere if you say to somebody like, you approach it like, oh, you know, you did this thing wrong, versus like, let me show you how to do things better. So, you know, think coach versus disciplinarian. And also, if we do something we've been doing more recently as a result of a new person that I brought in, is setting up performance improvement plans that are really, really geared towards success. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Candace has to say on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually going to mention the PIPs, which we call the performance improvement plans. I think those are super helpful because it's a guide on what they need to improve on. It kind of refocuses the employee. It makes them know that you care on progressing and making sure that you're not just giving up on them. You're giving them the chance to kind of make sure that everything is kind of going to refocus them. And I think that's super important. Same thing with growth plans too. A growth plan doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be promoted or moving on to a new position. You could still grow in your current role. And as long as you're setting those guidelines for them and letting them know this is what we expect of your current position and where you could improve on, I think it's very clear to the employee and it helps them.
Great advice. Okay, well, it is almost 2 o'clock, but thank you so much everyone for all your questions. And we just got a question about whether this is being recorded. It is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording via email over the next couple of days. So you can return to this amazing advice that we heard anytime. And then also I included contact information for both Mary and Candace here on the screen. So if you have additional questions or you want to browse through resources, you can use those links there. Additionally, Mary's Collection Advantage Training Program is available on her website, maryshores.com. So you can find more information about that there. And all of us here are extremely active on LinkedIn as well. So make sure you look us all up on LinkedIn, follow Mary, follow Shores Communications, follow Arbeit, and make sure you stay up to date on all the resources that are being shared there as well. But that's all I have for you. And thank you again so much, Candace and Mary, for sharing all your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you soon via email.